I wrote a PowerPoint, but it isn't functioning. Technology sometimes beats us, so you have to do with my words, and I think it's very good to be not dependent on technology to help us, but let's do it with my words today. And I was asked to tell something about peace entrepreneurship today. So that does mean for me, how can we, how can you, how can I act for peace? And when we think about that, as we do also in our organization, then it starts to think about what is peace. And maybe peace is the word that is one of the issues we most disagree on in the world, what it means. So maybe take you a few seconds, 10 seconds, to remind for you personally, what does peace mean for you? It's certainly different than for John in the DRC and for a woman in Afghanistan. And take that through my words this morning. And first, before we think about how can we act for peace, then I think it's very important to understand the opposite. So I want to talk about today a bit about what is conflict and how can we address conflicts in such a way that we do it in a peaceful way. And that's why we should understand it. The last presentation ended with a movie, and there we saw how important it is to act collectively. But that collective action started with the individual decision to be part of it and to have a goal while you do it. So the same is for peace, taking that tree out of the road. And to understand conflict is part of our daily life. Because very simply said, it is a disagreement between two parties. It can even be only two persons. Sometimes it's even yourself only, when you disagree with yourself, what you should do best, whether it's your conscience or your pragmatism that you do. So conflict is very daily. We deal with it daily. And it is about ideas, it's about goals, it's about what you want to do, which music you want to have on the party, or which speakers you wanted to invite today for this TEDx day. You might disagree on it, but you find ways to settle it, although initially these were contradictory. Sometimes you have ideas that are incompatible. You cannot settle them both. That's part of a conflict. And many times it's not about facts, it's also about perceptions, because sometimes you think another person is thinking differently or wanted things differently, but when you don't ask and when you don't know, maybe it's only your perception that you think another is different. That's very important to take with us. And talking about that way in conflicts, then we will recognize many conflicts in our daily life. And it's not a worse thing. When we really are able to settle conflicts, to settle disagreements, to discuss with each other, to reflect and to have a solution for it, it can make us grow. Society is growing collectively based on the conflicts we have, on the disagreements we have, only when we settle these. Think only about 100 years ago in the position about women and men in the Netherlands and today, and then we can't even imagine that it was different. That we needed a conflict, we needed a group that resisted, that was angry, and nowadays we grow into another situation and the conflict made us grow together. So in that sense, it's also a positive way. Democracy is a constant way of settling our agreements, but we have mechanisms for it. We know how to do it. And when we cannot settle the conflicts, we have judges or mediators who can support us in doing it. So let's not make a problem out of each conflict. And let's understand it and how we settle these also in our daily life. When there are two parties or more in a conflict, it may be a bit more challenging when there is a power difference. You may even notice this when you have a settlement, when you have a conflict with your parents. They at the end have some more power, or with the teachers in the school. So you feel that there is another challenge of settling the conflict. And the bigger the power difference is, the more difficult it is to settle conflicts. And we come later on it when it's really asymmetric, when there's really one party that has power and can impose power, then we have a problem that is an obstacle for settling conflict. But even when there is a different power, we see it also in society, in social position, the teacher and the pupils. parents with children, even men and women in the family still, then there are ways to settle conflicts, even also to ask the help of other people and the mediators. So still, it is possible to settle conflict, always when we have the ways and we have the mechanisms which we share, which we can use to settle the conflict. I think that's very important. And again, I had a picture of a march of women in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and John already said a D with a small d, but still there you see that people who don't have the power to really influence the armed conflicts are marching with thousands of them in the street, and that makes them empower also. So collective action can empower a vulnerable situation of the individuals. That's also important in daily life and in the bigger conflicts. I really stress when we think about how we settle conflicts in our daily life, in terms of respect for others, in terms of reflecting together how to settle this, we also are able to understand the bigger conflicts that we hear about, where we want to act also on peace. On the example that John told us about the Congo, of Afghanistan, of now the sad situation in Syria and Central African Republic. Sometimes we think, what can we do? We are at distance, we are not part of it. But maybe when we understand how conflicts work, we can contribute by supporting people and organizations how to support them to settle the conflicts. And not only think in those violent people in the Congo who are fighting and I can do nothing. Most people are people who want to settle the conflict peacefully. And when we understand how to do it, we can also act for it. It's about equal opportunities, because then you have equal opportunity to settle your differences. It's about respect for differences, because you can be different than another person. You can think differently, you can be differently, you can have been born in another country. And other people might tell you that you are different and you have to behave different because you are different. That doesn't say that you have a problem in the relationship. So tolerance is not, sometimes we think that tolerance is something like, oh, I expect your difference, but I don't want to do nothing with you. That's a kind of negative accepting the other. Tolerance is really thinking, I am who I am, but there are many other people outside who are different, and that doesn't matter for our relationship. No, we can think differently. And that's exactly the problem why such big violent conflicts start. Because some people make people believe they have a problem with the other. You are made enemy because you have another skin color, or you come from another region, or you are a woman, or you are a man, or you are young, or whatever it can be. And that's the difference. So that's why it's so important that you organize yourself and say, here I am and I accept the other. Because, and then we come to the bigger conflicts. Conflicts are a problem at the moment they are violent and they are destructive. At the moment they are destroying communities, they are destroying groups because they are made enemies and you hate each other. And when violence is used to impose norms and to impose behaviors on people. And many times people in conflict areas, like in the Congo, like in Afghanistan, hardly have an option to act differently because they are threatened with the violence. So how can we act on that? And then I want to finish with, I have nothing because it doesn't work, but I was looking at it, with the ideas of a Norwegian scholar, peace scholar, who many years ago said there is not only violence as we know it, or what he called the direct violence, which we all know it is. That's beating, that's using arms, that is imposing ideas with the arms and with violence on others. And when you have power and you showed you use violence, then it's only necessary to threat with violence. So threatening with violence is also a very nasty form of violence. I think sometimes we forget that. But that's not the only form of violence. Galtung said there is also structural violence. That's not the beating, not the shooting, but that is then when we have structures, when we have laws, when we have ways of behave together, through which we structurally exclude or marginalize some people, based on who they are, based on a certain identity. And in one country, it might be women against men, in another country, like black against white, in another country, indigenous minorities, or religion. There are many reasons why people want to divide people based on that and use violence to make you believe that. And then it can be supported by law, by traditions, by we always did it. And then we come, and maybe also what John told us just before, then a certain economic system is a form of structural violence for many people in the Republic of Congo or in other countries, because they can't resist against the economic powers to use their own resources in their own way. This is a formal structural power without using the violence, structural violence. And then we have a third corner of the triangle of the three forms of power, and that's the cultural violence. Don't think culture in terms of particular cultures, because that's the problem of today. Islam culture, Catholic culture, Southern culture, black culture. We think that cultures as such are a problem. It are parts of certain culture that are negative and that are abused to legitimize structural violence. You are marginalized because you're not the right color, you're not the right religion, because you are a woman. And that way, when a group thinks it is allowed to marginalize people, then you even can think that it's a good thing, that you're doing right. It can make you believe that you're doing right. Slavery was for many years said because they are glad we do it because they cannot live for their own. Colonialism was based on that idea, no? That people are different, so they must be glad that we reign them. So that culture of violence, legitimizing the structural marginalization, is another triangle. So when we come back, how we can act for peace, that is, yes, resist violence, that is a way of settling our differences in a peaceful way, looking for mechanisms so we can settle these differences. But it's also to be very aware of what is surrounding us, why people are marginalized, and how are we legitimizing this marginalization, and how this can be abused by people who want the power and impose it by the weapons. And they say, yeah, we don't use the weapons, but we can resist dividing people in groups based on their identity. And that starts at home, that starts in this school, that starts in our country. And then we understand also the big conflict. And then we can act from an individual perspective, how we can act for peace everywhere in this world.